Welcome to Flow Unleashed. I'm Cameron Norsworthy, and this is your podcast for human performance.
Okay, welcome back, and Cam, thank you so much for letting me interview on the first part of the book. We've already looked a little bit about your personal story, and now we get to hear about that first section, which is about getting ready. Could you tell us a little bit more about the flow model that you introduced there and how it's helped you shape your mind to get ready for a flow state?
The flow model came about because we needed a practical visual example in which we can instantly reflect or mirror how we're feeling on the inside with what's happening, as opposed to it being, there's a lot of knowledge around flow and how to find flow, how to be at our best, how to reach an optimal state of functioning, peak performance and so forth. But how do we distill that into a very simple, visual, identifiable scenario? So that was, I guess, the origins of that flow model. And certainly speaking for myself, I'm very much human.
Really?
Not always to my liking. So I'm often finding myself in the red. And I'll often be persuading myself that actually I'm in the blue. But actually, when I take a moment to reflect and assess myself against this flow model, I'll be like, okay, actually, I've just sneaked into the red there. Whilst 95% of my brain will be trying to persuade myself that I am in the blue, I'll be able to identify with some type of behavior, some type of experiential response that's reflected in the red. And importantly, we all will, right? We're all humans. We all have an ego. We're all triggered by outcomes, emotions, and so forth. So I think that the trick is with the flow model is not this perfectionistic, idealistic scenario where we live in the blue and we're never in the red, but rather how quickly can we pivot to being back into the blue, back into that flow side of the equation, flow-orientated approach to a challenge. And this model very clearly lays out when we have challenge or complexity in front of us, how am I responding at different levels? It goes through behavior, goes through our thoughts, goes through our emotions, goes through our volitional approach. Am I egotistical? Am I outcome orientated? Am I intrinsically orientated? Am I focused on flow? What's important to me with this task, and how am I orientated towards the challenge?
When you say red and blue, imagine someone's never seen the flow model and doesn't really understand what it's depicting. Can you take us through what the colors mean and how you could imagine it if you're just listening in?
So imagine an inverted U, half a semicircle if you like, and akin to inverted U arousal theory, we have this increasing level of challenge, increasing level of complexity that we're facing. And the more the challenge is increased, the higher our performance. And we go from being bored to being relaxed, to being composed, to being playful, towards this optimal place where we're super engaged, being inactive in what we do. Hopefully we find flow. And when there's just too much challenge, too much complexity, previously we might have been in the blue, inviting the moment, wanting the richness of the experience just to crystallize and get more and more intense. But there becomes a tipping point, different for each individual and the task that we're doing. But there's a tipping point where it stops being optimal and our performance starts to decrease. And instead of going up that curve, we're now going down the curve as our performance decrements. And we move into the red, what I've called the red zone. To simplify a load of meaning and lessons that's explained in this book around these, what happens in all those experiential states. It's simplified into that blue orientated left side of that upward trajectory of that bell curve, and the red is that downward trajectory where we've gone past that optimal level of challenge and we've started to enter that tightness, strained, survival, stress responding state.
Mm. And so when you use the flow model to self-assess, are there ever moments when you're surprised by what it reveals?
Yes and no. I'm often surprised how I've persuaded myself that I am in the blue, but actually when I reflect, I see that I'm just tipped into the red. And so that never fails to surprise me. But at a deeper level, I'm not surprised, because I know I'm very much human and I know that's the way the brain works. And I know that when we're not managing our consciousness, when we don't have our flow mindset as the top of our game, front and center, then we're naturally wired biologically to be in the red. So at a deeper level, I'm not surprised, but on a sort of a moment-to-moment basis, I'm often surprised that, I thought I was in the blue, but actually I can see I'm actually focused on the outcome here, or actually what other people are thinking, or what I think other people are thinking of me is actually more important than I thought it was, or so forth.
Can you give us a little snapshot, a scenario of your life where this has happened to make it more tangible, right? Because right now we're looking at high level abstraction. So just to make it more relatable to what someone might be going through. Okay, I thought I was in the blue, but I was actually in the red. What might be going on there? Or tell us a story.
Yeah, so I'll give you two examples. One, a tennis example, and I apologize if there's too many tennis examples, but I was playing tennis yesterday and I was in the zone. I hit a great shot, felt great. Suddenly there's people clapping on the side. Straight away my brain goes to, oh wow, that was a good shot. Everyone thought it was a good shot. I look really cool. Let's do that again. And whilst part of my brain's going, I'm doing really well, I've just hit a great shot, I can keep that going, thinking I'm in the blue, straight away my whole mind's gone to actually, I'm back in the red now. I'm caring about what other people think. I'm distracted away from the task. I'm being more egoic about my agenda here. I'm wanting to look good rather than revel in the shot. So even though I'm still playing well, and at that time I might have been in the blue, but because of that external trigger, I've shifted into the red. And, we can all relate to this every day. It's, I guess, a really obvious one is when we go dance on the dance floor. We might go, oh yeah, let's go dancing because there's this intrinsic of, yeah, it feels good and we'll be loose. And then just as we walk onto the dance floor, we start to look at what other people are doing. And then we start to go, oh, I wonder what I'll look like. And suddenly that joy of just dancing is faded away and we become contextualized into this, I've got to look a certain way, I've got to move a certain way. And instead of trusting that innate intuitive movements from the sound, we're actually locked into this matrix of needing to look good or needing to impress other people by our moves. And for some people it's too much and we shy away and we become wooden and frozen. And for some people at the extreme, we won't even get onto the dance floor, because we're too deep into the red.
Yeah, that was a good example. I think that made it a lot more clear for most people, me included. So when your clients use the flow model, what are they surprised to find or discover about themselves?
How rarely flow is prioritized. So almost every client, after a logical explanation, might agree that flow's a great thing. Who wouldn't want an optimal state of functioning? So at one level, we can be so on board with the idea of wanting to be in flow, a natural state of harmony, effortless action, total trust. But on a practical level, how rarely that comes into our thinking. How rarely does that actually get prioritized for an experience? I challenge anyone listening to this now just to project ahead to an upcoming, challenging, conflicting situation, such as an intimate conversation or a performance or a public talk. And just in those split seconds of visualizing that, and if you haven't done so, go for it now. Just visualize that moment happening. When we visualize, there's an experience connected to that projection. And often that there hasn't been an intention to find flow in that projection. There hasn't been an intention to put flow first for that future experience. And so at one level, we might relate to and understand that flow is a good thing and we want to be there. But practically, very rarely do we actually have it as the seed intention for what we're doing. And so a lot of the time when I'm working with people in this ready phase, it's really about how can flow become a deeper, more central cornerstone to what we do. And time again, myself included, we think we've got it, we've done it, it happens, and then the next point, an hour later, the next day, the next week, whatever, we find ourselves back in the red because it hasn't been reprioritized. Mm. And some of that's to do because we're thwarting, decades of conditioning. And it's not something we do once, but something we have to continuously prioritize. But it never fails to surprise me with people I work with, how little effort people put into prioritizing flow for a particular task. Mm.
Yeah. I mean, even people that are obsessed and working with flow, I feel it slips away. For me, for example, I think about flow thousands of times during the day, and still it would slip away with something very important, I feel. Would you say?
Yeah.
Would you say ready is about deepening your relationship with flow itself?
Absolutely. And inexplicably intertwined with that is the relationship we have with ourselves.
Yeah, big one.
Do we feel we're worthy of that deep state of harmony? Do we trust ourselves enough to trust our actions? Are we secure enough to let the moment unfold without needing to control things or sabotage things or push things from one way to the next? What is our relationship with failure, fear, intimacy, and how do we lead ourselves into uncertainty? How do we relate to ourselves when things don't go exactly how we perceive them to, or we feel slightly out of control? And those scenarios, tell us a lot about ourselves. And pressure reveals so much about ourselves and how we lead ourselves and the relationship we have with ourselves and the journey to flow and being ready, as we call it, as part of that ready, steady, go, ready, steady, flow scenario, is all about that. Is the relationship I have with myself, is my self-leadership allowing flow to occur? Is it front and center? So yes, we absolutely deepen our relationship, our affinity, our ability to allow flow into our lives. And at the same time, we learn a lot about how we're relating to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that's even a largely overlooked aspect of flow in a way, right? The the self relationship of what it reveals about our own dialogue and our relationship to ourselves.
Yeah, you have the sort of more performance orientated people who are chasing flow, chasing that peak performance state. And they're often trying to get there through an opposing attritional avenue of push harder, beat myself up more, force my way to get into that flow state all the time at odds, and just deepening and sponsoring an orientation that's taking them further and further away from flow. And so it can be even more eye-opening for that sort of group of people. And I guess there's another group of people who are more into sort of a deeper state of inner harmony, be that through spiritual means or, other avenues or yoga or whatever it is. But they have an understanding of that inner harmony and that inner friction and that inner conflicts and that inner distraction already, because they're used to perhaps mindfulness or working with thoughts and so forth, but still learning how to orientate ourselves towards a particular task, as opposed to using those things as a plaster or as an intervention, but using it as a fundamental intention. Being proactive rather than reactive is often a journey for a lot of people.
Yeah. Help us understand the difference between useful arousal and interference. When is arousal not serving you versus when it is actually driving you towards something purposeful?
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's quite individualistic and intrapersonal as well as interpersonal, in the sense that there is an optimal level of arousal that gets us, as soon as arousal hits our system, it spikes our sympathetic nervous system. It helps us to become alert, present, amplifies our sensory capacity. So it's a great thing. Arousal is a fantastic thing. And at some stage, that arousal can feel so heightened and so disorientating internally that we feel the need to think our way through the scenario. So we start to perceive that physiological arousal as a problem instead of it as a benefit and like a boost of energy, if you like. We start to perceive it as something that is nerves instead of excitement, for example. And so we start to have thoughts of worry and concern or doubt and anxiety, for example, as a consequence of seeing that physical arousal as nerves, as opposed to viewing it as excited and us being calm and having helpful thoughts and inviting the challenge ahead. That previous red orientated scenario would be a more, I guess, avoidance, friction scenario, as opposed to we might be more approach orientated and inviting the challenge on the blue side. So the flow models maps out quite clearly how our internal experience changes when that stress moves into, as stress scientists might call, distress or unhelpful stress, as opposed to it being eustress, good stress, stress that is going to amplify our ability to be present and our ability to perform. And building a relationship with ourselves and understanding how our stress levels affect our psychology and physiology is a really important journey and growth for people to better relate to flow and allow flow to occur.
Okay, Cam, you write that our psyche, when untrained, will naturally get in our way. That's a very strong statement. What's the common way you see high performers sabotaging themselves before they even start?
The biggest one that stands out to me is this idea, what I touched on earlier, of projecting into the future and not projecting flow. Even people who might have a strong mental game might proactively visualize their future experience to feel more in control of it, to train the mind and body how to act when the moment comes. Yet their visualization might be one of grinding through the finish line, clutching through that last minute experience, and the pride that comes from overcoming this overwhelming sense of grit and forced application. And whilst that's better than visualizing crumbling or our knees going all jelly-like as we get all nervous and so forth, it's still a coping strategy. It's a good coping strategy, but it's not as optimal as visualizing ourselves being effortless, meeting the moment with absolute trust. And whilst that might sound a very subtle difference, the experiential texture, the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations, the overall experience is drastically different. And so there's always an opportunity there for anyone. If we have an event or a challenge coming up or facing complexity, we have an opportunity to help create a self-fulfilling experience by training our brain and body to be in that moment in flow. And it's such a missed opportunity with so many people, even if they've put a lot of time into their performance psychology, just because we haven't inserted that flow or that effortless trusting action and that absorption into the experience of what that visualization is.
Do you feel that people might have the idea that this grittiness, that their own inner David Goggins is almost a precondition to achieve flow?
For a lot of people, absolutely. Yeah. I think there's memes, there's cultures, there's industries. The past decades of performance psychology has been built on suppressing internal friction, be that emotions or thoughts, to get ahead. Survival of the fittest. Push harder, force it if you have to, fake it to make it. This sort of suppression of anything negative to rise above it. And the last couple of decades has taught us that actually we don't process what's happening internally by doing that. And whilst that might have a momentary compliance, it comes back to bite us. It's like there's bubbling lava in the volcano and we're just suppressing it. And then at some stage that pressure becomes immense friction and it erupts and it comes out sideways. Most often in real life, it distracts us. It creates blind spots. It makes us over-emotional. It forces us to become very rigid and narrow-minded in order to contain what we've got, self-support the narrative that we're thinking at the time. And it's, I certainly grew up with it. And I thought I just had to work harder. And slowly over time, I've realized practice makes permanent, not practice makes perfect. And how we do things is really, really important. The quality of how we do things is really, really important. It's not all about quantity. And don't get me wrong, there's time for volume, there's time for quantity, there's time for putting in that hard work there's obvious gains there. But ordinarily that mindset to get fit, to persevere, to grit. I don't want to use resilience in that language because I think resilience is different and more agile and more responsive, more aligned with flow. But a lot of people don't know any different. that's how we deal with pressure. That's how we deal with challenge. And in the past, that's what's worked to a certain extent. It's what's got us to where we have been. And a lot of people at the top of the tree are the people who've been able to deal with that pressure in that way the best. But has it helped people be their optimal best? Has it helped them be in flow? And then occasionally you just see someone come through and just rise way past those limits, and you're like, what's happened here? And it's ordinarily someone who's got a very different approach and isn't playing that same game, and they found their flow and they're able to. But I think more and more in the last couple of decades, that's changing. People now with emotional intelligence and sport and performance psychology and positive psychology is changing cultures and changing how we view performance, and so that the skill set is much more varied and much wider.
I feel that while that is happening in science, it's just not quite trickling over. I'm always surprised that I have this weird bias that in my day-to-day I speak with a lot of people that are either open-minded, very well-read, very versed, or even do studies in these things. And then when I come back to people that might not be in the high-performance spectrum, or people that are just trying out, that are still finding information in a slightly different way, it just hasn't reached them in the same way, I feel. And so I think conversations that are personal, approachable, and very down to earth might reach some of these people to help spread the culture much more.
Yeah, it's just so common, whether it's in the workplace or on the sporting field or even within the family homes. I think a great one that everyone can relate to is intimacy, and allowing ourselves to love, allowing ourselves to have closeness. And so often that's met with fear, that's met with the red zone, right? It's met with this need to have an outcome of this intimacy, to control the outcome, and then we compare, and then we have expectations, and then we start to protect, and then we become guarded, and then we start to overthink things, and then we try to have more control, and then it's all becoming a bit too much, so we try to force it to happen in this manner, and we double down on it, on this approach, and we're trying to do the right thing. It's not that the intention is bad, but we're deep down, we don't want to get to that place of not needing to worry about losing control. Mm-hmm. And so there's this constant need to control. And as a result, we become wooden, clunky, stiff. And in relationships, it comes out sideways, be that we get a bit more passive aggressive, or we create a bit of distance with ourselves, with someone, and we lose the opportunity for love. We lose the opportunity for connection. We lose the opportunity to have a deeper level of connection with friends or family or partners or whoever it is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. For sure, something to take with us as we either start today, whenever you're listening into that. Seeing it as an opportunity with intimacy, with people, yourself, with your experience.
Thank you for listening to Flow Unleashed. If you enjoyed listening, please subscribe to get notified when our next episode drops. The more people that subscribe, the better I can make the show for you. Equally, please leave a review. Your review will go a long way to helping others find this pod. Until the next time, thank you for listening to Flow Unleashed.